When it comes to budget Sony 85mm primes, the Sony 85mm 1.8 was the lens that I used for a long time. However, Sirui has just released an 85mm f1.4 lens for about the same price. Let's do some tests and I'll tell you what I think about these two lenses at the end. My window's open, so sorry if you can hear the birds out there. It's like the first nice day in Cleveland, so I really want to take advantage of it. Starting off, here are the spec tables for these two lenses. You can pause and read more if you want to jump into the specs a little more, but the ones that jumped out to me were price, aperture, size, and weight. To me, both of these lenses score about the same when it comes to build quality. The Sirui feels a little bit more sturdy, but that's because it feels heavier. The G Masters are also built better, but also they are way more expensive, so they should be built better. The Sirui does have larger switches and an AEL button that is like very clicky. I don't know how to describe it any differently, but it's very tactile for a lens custom button. Not a huge difference, but there is a difference. The Sony lens is lighter and smaller, but both of them have 67mm front threads. Onto some autofocus tests. In the low light autofocus test, the Sirui 85mm really struggled with finding focus without racking back and forth. The Sony 85mm 1.8 was able to grab focus without hunting, but it was not reliably staying on point that I tapped on screen. It would shift slightly after I tapped where I wanted to focus. The Sony is doing a better job in low light autofocus. These aren't quite doing as good a job as the 85mm G Master Mark II, but these lenses are about a third of the price of this lens, so considering, I think the 85mm 1.8 is doing a fantastic job here. Okay, 85mm f1.8, and we are at f1.8 wide open. Okay, you can go to marker 2. I have, for all of these, I have VNDs, and they're all at 5, so I probably should have brought a 6 to 9, but I brought my 1 to 5. And marker 1. Seems like it caught face detect, and there's eye detect. Gorgeous. Can you step out of frame? And back in. And out of frame. And back in. Gorgeous. Sirui 85mm f1.4. Okay, Mark II. Perfect. And come back to Mark 1. Gorgeous. Okay, step out of frame. You're out of frame right there. Okay, step back into frame. And out of frame. Okay, now jump back in. Seems like it goes to face and then eye pretty quickly. Turn around and look at the lighthouse. And turn around right now. Oh, interesting. That caught her eye pretty quick. Perfect. This is so much better than me doing this by myself and like guessing what it's doing. The hunting of the Sirui lens happens more in low light situations or when you're focusing quickly. If you mostly shoot in brighter or ideal lighting conditions, you may not notice a difference between these two lenses in autofocus. For photo autofocus, I shot a burst of 17 photos of my wife turning around, and the Sony got 16 of 17 photos in focus. The Sirui got 15 of 17 photos in focus, but 6 of the photos were focusing on her hair instead of her eyes. For the price, I'll let you decide if that's acceptable. For comparison, the G Master Mark II costs $1,800 and it got all of them in focus while one of them was between her hair and her eyes. So even the most expensive lens here isn't perfect. It's pretty close, but not quite perfect. For focus noise, when it comes to focus noise, both of these lenses are silent. I'm only saying that because the original 85mm G Master had this very weird focusing noise when you're using autofocus, but both of these lenses are silent. Before moving on to image quality, I want to thank today's video sponsor, Artlist. Artlist has a crazy new feature using AI to create images and videos. Start by generating an image with one of their styles, write your prompt, and if you want some help writing a more in-depth prompt, you can select the Enhance button. This will have AI enhance your prompt in the style that you chose. I found the best results by writing something kind of generic and then allowing AI to enhance it and then tweaking the AI response to get what I had in mind. You can select which aspect ratio you'd like to use and how many different versions you'd like. For generating ideas, I like to generate 3 at a time. After generating an image, you can select to animate it. Pressing the animate button will bring up a new prompt that AI suggests for you. You can adjust the prompt as you want. You can adjust how long you want your clip to be, the resolution, and then press animate. Depending on the duration and resolution of your clip, it can take between 30 seconds to 5 minutes, then your video will be ready to download. With Artlist license, these AI images and videos are available for your personal and commercial projects as well, so you can use these in your personal work or in your final client deliverables. I can see myself using these AI tools in the scripting process to get some ideas for shots and maybe be able to generate multiple ideas quickly. If you'd like to check out Artlist, they're offering 2 free months if you use the link in my description. Artlist has over 700,000 assets in their catalog, ranging from music, sound effects, voiceover, templates, LUTs, and now AI image and video. So be sure to find exactly what you're looking for. Thank you, Artlist, for sponsoring this video. When it comes to color cast, let's check out some color chips and the vector scope. On the vector scope, the more the colors are pointing to their boxes, the more accurate the colors are. Starting with the Sony, most of these colors are pointing to their boxes. This is a pretty accurate and neutral look. The magenta skews a little more red, and the green has a little more yellow in it. For me, these are pretty natural colors. Now onto the Sirui 85mm. This one skews much warmer than the Sony. Almost all the colors are not hitting their boxes and skewing more towards yellow, magenta, or red. If you like warmer tones in your images, I could see you preferring the Sirui for your workflow. Maybe portrait photographers would like this a little bit more, but personally, I would rather have a neutral image and just color grade the image how I want to in post. So I prefer the Sony here. This one comes down to personal preference, but the Sony wins for me. When it comes to distortion, both of these lenses had some distortion. The Sony had a very slight pincushion distortion at the top and the bottom of the frame. For what it's worth, I've used this lens a lot and I've never noticed it until I shot my grid cutting mat. The Sirui has noticeably more pincushion distortion around all of the edges. We can also see the color cast here. The white balance was set for 5600 for both of these images. For comparison, the G Masters unsurprisingly handled distortion better. For portraits where you're not filling the frame with the subject, this may not be as big of an issue, but if you're trying to shoot natural images, the distortion may look strange if your subjects are near the edges of the frame with the Sirui. For flaring, I did the flashlight phone test here and it was pretty uneventful. Both lenses had some flaring, not enough to wash out the entire image though. The Sirui appeared to be a little warmer, while the Sony looked a little cooler. For bokeh, we can see the Sirui's faster aperture here. The Sirui has more bokeh at f1.4, as you would expect. At 1.4, the contrast is also lower on the Sirui 85mm. If we're really pixel peeping here, the Sirui's bokeh seems to be a little clearer and more precise, while the Sony seems to be a little blurry here. The Sirui does have 15 aperture blades, while the Sony has 9. For sharpness and image quality, let's quickly go over some charts. The Sony 85mm was sharper than I expected it to be. Wide open, the center is sharp, while the edges are a little bit soft, but by f2, the corners sharpen up. This lens does have some vignette until f4 though. Chromatic aberration is noticeable in the center and the edges at 1.8, less at f4, and by 2.8, I'm not able to notice it. For the Sirui 85mm, the first thing I noticed was the chromatic aberration in the center wide open. The center looks soft due to the amount of chromatic aberration here. The center is sharp at f2, and the edges sharpen up at 2.8. The center chromatic aberration is gone between f1.8 and 2, but the edges of the frame have some throughout all apertures. This lens does have some vignetting until f2. If you're shooting charts with the Sirui, you'll notice the chromatic aberration, but if you're translating this to portraits, I don't think you would really notice it unless you see some in the edges of your frame. Maybe you would get some chromatic aberration in the center of your image if you're shooting wide open and you have a lot of high contrast areas, but if you stop the lens down to 1.8 or 2, the center chromatic aberration will not be an issue. The Sony was sharp in the center at 2, and it was sharpening up the edges by f2.8. The Sirui is technically faster, but if you're using these wide open, they actually sharpen up around the same apertures, which is pretty interesting. For minimum focusing distance, I had a whole long-winded section I was gonna go into, but I'll just cut it down and tell you guys my test results. The Sony's advertised minimum focusing distance is 31.5 inches, and I measured it at 31.25 inches. Pretty close. More interestingly, the Sirui's minimum focusing distance is advertised at 33.5 inches, but I have measured at 31.5 inches. So on paper, these have slightly different minimum focusing distances, but I measured differently when I was doing my tests right here in the office. So they're pretty much the same. For focus breathing, I wasn't able to notice any focus breathing in the Sony f1.8. On the Sirui, I noticed it due to how it focuses though. If you're doing focus tracks, it finds focus by focusing past and then it backs off to have your subject in focus. This is more apparent in low light situations, but if you're using these lenses for video, I think the focus breathing is kind of distracting on the Sirui, so the Sony wins for me here. For stabilization, both of these lenses don't have any optical stabilization. That was an easy one. When it comes to which of these lenses I would choose, I shoot a lot of video, so I would go with the Sony 85mm 1.8. It just does a better job at autofocusing over the Sirui, especially in low light. The Sony does not have any focus breathing issues, it handles distortion better, and it has more natural colors. So for me, this just fits my workflow better. The case for the Sirui is maybe if you're a portrait photographer and you actually prefer the warmer colors, you don't mind the distortion, and you want that faster aperture, keeping in mind that wide open, this is a little bit soft even in the center. If you're cool with that, the Sirui is a great lens, but for me, I'm sticking with the Sony. Which of these lenses would you choose? Let me know in the comments down below. Like this video if you found it useful, and if you're still looking for 85mm lenses, particularly for video, I made a 85mm G Master Mark I versus a G Master Mark II video, so I'll leave that on screen now. Thanks for sticking around to the end, and I'll see you in the next one.